what are the differences between the Democratic and Republican parties?
Oh, well, I mean, it's impossible for me anyway, and I think most people, to speak objectively about that. You know, I'm a Democrat. I'm a liberal, left liberal, kind of progressive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm biased, of course. But I mean, I think. I mean, one of the keys into this is to look at the issue of fiscal policy, and it's going to sound really boring, but you know, generally speaking, in the modern era, you know, the conservative Republican side has generally been for fiscal restraint, at least in the social policy area. And Democrats have been more apt to want to spend money on social programs. So, I mean, to be utterly simplistic, let's start there and say who is more likely to approve a more generous social safety net, health insurance coverage, give more flexibility and more support to people with disabilities, just in general. And I think, whereas now on the flip side of that, you know, the conservative Republican sort of side of things philosophically has a little bit more to say on this subject of individuality, of individual freedom, and a particular, not exclusive, but a particularly interesting viewpoint, alliances on issues like sort of right to life type of issues around things like assisted suicide, prenatal testing, and sort of existential things that at least some of the disability community are ambivalent about or feel very strongly about, where people on the left might be more on the side of things like legalizing assisted suicide. It's complicated. It's important to note, and people have been noting it lately a lot more, that a couple of decades ago, disability issues were a lot more bipartisan than they are now. They were never completely so. Again, that spending issue, I think, is sort of the core difference, and it's hard for a right-wing person to be really supportive of disability as a political matter, just by nature. You can be completely, you know, on at least on the you know, accepting that we're good people, individual, you know, helping us achieve individually, but it's hard to be supportive on a policy way if you're generally fiscally conservative and skeptical of social civil rights laws as a way to deal with stuff. It's harder to get through that to your own ideology. But again, despite that, one of the reasons why the ADA passed in 1990 was because it had significant bipartisan support. You had senators like Bob Dole, who was a Republican, pretty conservative, maybe not by today's standards, but still. But he had a disability, and he fought hard to get it passed, and others the same. It was signed by President the first George Bush, proudly. He didn't sign it in a closet, secretly embarrassed. Yeah. He signed it with great pride. So yeah, I don't know if that's a coherent answer, but again, I think my view again is there are some built-in barriers and pathways where it's hard to maintain a certain ideology, broad ideology, and how it interacts with disability is tricky. But it can be tricky for both sides.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And it makes total sense. I guess I will add one more question to that. Do you think that either party has it figured out in terms of the
Yeah,
I guess extending or
yeah,
giving the disability community what they need to on what's on the disability
yeah.
community's agenda in terms of activism and
Mhm,
accessibility. Do you think either party is going to grant that? It sounds like you said the
mhm,
Democratic Party is going to be more friendly in terms of
mhm.
money, financial assistance.
Okay,
But
yeah.
are they thinking about things in an act like a accessibility way? Is that actually a tenet
Yeah,
on their agenda? You know,
it's so hard to talk about. I mean, again, I'm a Democrat, but I also feel like I guess what I feel like today changes all the time,
yeah.
right? Is that the Democratic slash left framework has more of a built-in structure that can accommodate what the disability community needs more easily than what the Republicans and the right has. However,
Okay.
in practice, Democrats still haven't don't really understand overall as much as they should
Okay.
and they don't prioritize these things to the degree that I would like to see.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to ask.
Yeah,
Is it a priority for either party?
not
Yeah.
enough. Again,
Yeah.
it's built into their framework. It should be
Okay.
a not a heavy lift, whereas it's a much heavier lift ideologically for a Republican, your average right winger, to do to deal with disability issues than it is for a Democrat. But that doesn't mean the Democrats do it on
Okay.
a regular basis. Some do, more do now than I think maybe a little while ago. The 2020 presidential race did produce one notable thing where a bunch of candidates for president put out really detailed policy platforms, which by itself is a
Okay.
difference. Like there's been some candidates in the recent years who did, but it was kind of spotty and maybe just, not a bunch of them, but a bunch ended up doing it. Again, how they're following through is an entirely different thing. Um, a lot of the disability activist community is having a real hard time with the CDC right now and how it's talking about
Mm-hmm.
disability and chronic illness in terms of the pandemic and how their policies seem to be going that in ways that may not be that good for us. And this is in a Democratic administration. And there are definitely disability
Yeah.
activists who voted for Biden probably and worked to try and get that through, who are really questioning their whether it was worth it, and you know. So yeah, it's messy. It's messy. It's not an obvious thing,
Yeah.
and I do believe I can't quite. I think it's Pew did some research back in 2016. I don't know if there's been any more recent research, but in 2016 they did some polling and found that basically that among people with disabilities who are eligible voters, that basically it was evenly split between Democrats and Republicans.
Mm.
It wasn't like I think my recollection is it went a little bit slightly toward Hillary Clinton rather than Donald Trump, but not like by any like huge, super
Yeah.
noticeable, like, oh, clearly disabled people prefer blah, like that. It wasn't.